Texas. The day had an uneasy feel from the start, and I should have trusted my instincts. I was driving an old Ranger truck along one of the narrow service roads, heading toward a remote trail where a pair of campers reported hearing strange sounds the night before. My radio crackled with static, the dispatcher's voice fading in and out, as if the entire preserve was trying to block any outside communication. My job was straightforward enough: patrol the backcountry, make sure no one was breaking rules, keep an eye on the wildlife, and ensure the safety of visitors. But that morning, everything felt charged, as though the humidity in the air crackled with more than just the usual Gulf warmth. I had no idea how much that charge would change my life, or how deeply I would come to regret not turning around right then. I parked at a clearing beneath a stand of longleaf pines. The trunks looked tall and straight, each one a silent sentinel rising out of the soft, sandy soil. I hopped out of the truck, checked my gear, and listened. I've been a ranger here for years, so I've heard the wind whistle through pine needles, the calls of barred owls, and the scurrying of armadillos through ground cover. But that day, the silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no rustling of underbrush. The morning sun climbed the sky, warming the tops of the trees, but it felt like I was stepping into the quiet belly of some unfamiliar realm. I glanced at my watch, though I'm not sure why. It was only 7:30. I had the entire day ahead, a day scheduled for routine checks, verifying campsite permits, and maybe reminding a few over-enthusiastic visitors about local regulations. My father always taught me to respect the land, to keep my senses open. He was full-blood Cherokee, taught me the old ways, and how nature seldom remains silent unless it's uneasy. Standing there, with the humidity weighing me down, and not a single bird singing, I felt the land itself was on guard. I started walking along the trail, following a narrow footpath that wound around palmetto fronds and scattered pine needles. Tall grasses brushed my calves. The ground was soft from overnight rain, but I noticed no fresh footprints besides my own. This was unusual, given the visitors' complaints from the evening before. They said something had crashed through the woods near their tents, letting out a low, throaty rumble. They left before sunrise and reported it at the ranger station. Now it was my duty to see if a feral hog or a rogue black bear might be causing trouble. We do have black bears in East Texas, though they're not common. But whatever that couple heard, I had a feeling it wasn't a bear. I made my way deeper, counting my steps more out of habit than anything else. My old boots sank into the damp soil, leaving clear impressions behind. The morning light filtered through the pines in sharp, slanting beams that made the forest glow gold and green. Sweat trickled down my neck. It gets hot quick in Texas, especially in that thick, swampy region. The sweat did little to cool me. Still, that quiet pressed in on me from all sides, so I slowed my breathing, tried to pick up any trace of movement. That's when I heard it, the snap of a twig somewhere to my left. I froze and scanned the area. The forest was dense with brush, pine, and cypress. Tangled vines dangled from branches. For a moment, I saw nothing but shades of green and brown. Then I heard a soft rustling, as if something large was shifting its weight against the undergrowth. My heart hammered in my chest, but I reminded myself I was a ranger, and it was my job to face the unexpected. I took a slow step toward the sound, then another. My pulse pounded so loud I swore it shook the ground. I reasoned that if it was a hog or a black bear, I'd at least get a glimpse before it disappeared. Another crack of branches. This time it was sharper, as though whatever hid in the undergrowth had more weight than a hog or a deer. The thick brush parted for a split second. I caught a flicker of movement, dark, sinewy, about the height of a man but moving with a fluid, gliding motion. It was gone before I could blink. No natural species here in the big thicket stands upright like that. Part of me wondered if some tall hiker was cutting through the brush, but that shape was wrong. The proportions seemed too elongated, and the color of its hide or skin, whatever it was, blended too well with the shadows. A A chill ran up my spine. I instinctively touched the sidearm on my belt. I've never been trigger happy. My father taught me that guns demand caution, especially on sacred land. But in that moment, my instincts flared, bright, yelling at me to remain on guard. Something was out there, something I couldn't name. I tried not to panic. Instead, I inched closer, calling out, "Hello, park ranger here. Anyone in need of help?" My voice echoed and died among the pines. Nothing answered. I waited for half a minute. Then a cardinal in the distance began to sing again. That signaled the forest was returning to normal. Maybe I'd spooked a trespasser, or maybe it was a trick of the light. I told myself to keep calm, but I was on edge. I continued down the trail, following it toward the banks of the Neches River. That section of the preserve is thick with cypress knees and floodplain pockets. You can't always go off trail without sinking knee-deep in wet ground. If someone was out there, they'd have a tough time staying hidden. Yet I saw no footprints. The quietness gnawed at me again. Something moved once more in my peripheral vision. I spun around, but the woods stood empty. My hands tingled with adrenaline. I pressed on, traveling deeper, taking note of snapped branches or fresh scars on tree trunks. I found a half-eaten raccoon carcass along a muddy bank. The poor thing's body was torn in a strange, almost surgical way. I've seen coyotes take out small animals, but they typically leave ragged tears and random scatter. This looked different, like a purposeful single strike through flesh and bone. I crouched to examine it, covering my nose at the sudden stench. Flies buzzed in a frantic haze, but the kill looked fresh. Blood was still bright, and the warmth of decomposition hadn't settled in. It couldn't have been more than an hour old. My stomach twisted. If a wild hog got hold of the raccoon, it might have done damage, but not in such a clean, almost strategic manner. I carefully searched the area for tracks, found nothing. Just flattened brush and a few droplets of blood leading off into the thick tangles of vines. I tried my radio again. "Dispatch, this is Standing Elk. Do you copy?" Static crackled in my ear, followed by faint words I couldn't decipher. The interference was worse than usual. I repeated my request, feeling that prickle of dread intensify. The line fizzled. I looked up at the canopy, noticing how the tall pines, water oaks, and cypresses formed a near impenetrable roof. Sometimes signals in the big thicket get lost. I'd have to hike back out if I wanted a clear channel. Though logic told me to retreat, a sense of duty propelled me forward. Park visitors had reported an unknown threat. I had to identify it. At the very least, I had to see if a large, dangerous species was roaming these woods, risking everyone's safety. My job was to protect the preserve, the wildlife, and the people who wander inside. I stood and moved on, with a slight tremble in my knees that I tried to ignore. As I ventured deeper, the forest smell grew pungent. Waterlogged soil, decaying leaves, and the tang of cypress bark. My father once told me these wetlands carry the spirits of the old world. If they're silent, it often means they're watching. I tried to draw confidence from my heritage, reminding myself that we, as Cherokee, have always lived close to the land. But even that comfort felt distant now, overshadowed by an unshakable sense that someone or something was observing my every step. I soon arrived at a clearing near a shallow bend of the river. Willows drooped over the bank. The water moved lazily, reflecting the bright sky. This was the first time I'd seen open space all morning, and the sunlight felt reassuring. I paused to drink from my water bottle, scanning the trees. After a minute, a muskrat scurried along the muddy bank. A sense of normalcy returned. It was quiet, but at least there was some wildlife moving around. I relaxed a little. Perhaps I was overreacting. Maybe the figure I saw earlier was a lost hiker. Maybe the raccoon's odd wounds had a natural explanation. I forced myself to loosen my shoulders. Then I smelled something foul, more powerful than the typical odor of damp decay. It was a rancid stench, like rotting meat left in the sun. I covered my mouth with my hand and scanned the clearing. Across the river, half hidden among brush, lay what looked like the carcass of a deer. I squinted, though my eyes already watered from the stench. The deer, a decent-sized doe, had deep gashes across its torso, its entrails partially exposed. That was bad enough, but there was more. The doe's hind legs had been twisted as if wrenched around with inhuman force. My skin crawled, but I had to investigate. I found a spot where the water was shallow enough to cross, splashing cold up to my shins. Once on the other side, I approached carefully, scanning the ground for any sign of footprints or tracks. The deer's eyes were wide, dried, out, and lifeless. Flies buzzed around the open wounds. My heart pounded. It looked like something had torn straight through her hide. I kept my distance, circled around, and found more of those odd, deliberate tears on the opposite flank. The arrangement of the wounds didn't match what I'd expect from a common wild attacker. Something about the precision felt disturbingly calculated, almost like it had singled out certain organs. My gut twisted again, and I felt an overwhelming urge to get out of there, but duty held me in place. I crouched by the deer's flank, checking the soil for footprints. It was soft and muddy, but everything was churned up with scattered marks. My best guess was that the attacker had some arrangement of toes or claws that didn't match any species I knew. The spacing was strange, like prints left by a foot that wasn't quite human, nor entirely animal. I swallowed hard. No official field guide prepared me for that shape. A sudden shuffle behind me made me jump. I spun around, hand on my sidearm. Only the wind moved through the clearing. The muskrat had vanished. My breathing sounded too loud in my own ears. Then, with no warning, I saw a dark silhouette at the edge of the trees. It was standing upright, partially hidden by cypress knees. My heart leapt into my throat. I couldn't make out details, just the sense of tall, lean limbs and a bent posture, as if it was trying to remain inconspicuous. Then it moved, silent, fluid, stepping behind the trunk of an old cypress. I whispered, "Hey, show yourself." Not sure if I wanted a reply. Silence. I took 2 cautious steps forward, gun half drawn, shouting that I was a park ranger. My voice shook. I advanced another step, but there was nothing there. Branches and Spanish moss swayed in the slow current of the air. Sweat trickled down my temple. I felt certain I was being toyed with. This presence, whatever it was, did not fear me, nor did it feel threatened by a firearm. It watched me. It wanted me to see its handiwork, the dead raccoon, the twisted deer. A chill spread in my chest as I realized how methodical this all seemed. I returned to the deer and snapped a few photos with my phone. Though signal or not, I'd have evidence to show my supervisor once I got back to the station. Then I turned around and hurried back across the river. The rest of the morning, I scoured every corner of that remote area, searching for any sign of a normal explanation. But the more I looked, the more I felt I was stepping into a labyrinth of oppressive quiet and fleeting shadows. Several times I glimpsed a shape sliding behind a tree, or heard a faint scratching against bark. Once, I thought I saw a reflective glint, 2 eyes peering from a hollow log. Yet every time I approached, I found nothing. By noon, my nerves were on edge, and I realized the day's heat was oppressive. My shirt clung to my chest, soaked with sweat. Every muscle in my body felt coiled, ready to spring. I circled back to the truck, planning to drive closer to a known campsite with a better vantage point. As I walked, the forest around me brightened. The hush slowly lifted. Birds began chirping again. Squirrels darted among the branches. A sense of normal life returned. I tried my radio once more, and this time the reception was clearer. I reported the unusual kills and asked for backup, half embarrassed that I sounded so rattled. The dispatcher told me she'd send another ranger, a young recruit named Alexander Rowe, to meet me at a known landmark, a large fallen oak near a popular trail intersection. We'd investigate together. The idea of backup eased me, though dread still hovered in my mind. I hopped into the ranger truck, started the engine, and began bumping along the narrow dirt road, scanning the underbrush as I went. Every gust of wind made me tense, thinking I might see that tall, sinewy outline again. But the drive was uneventful. 15 minutes later, I reached the designated meeting spot, an old oak that had toppled in a recent storm. Its massive trunk lay across the clearing, festooned with mushrooms. Alexander was already waiting in his Jeep. He was in his mid-20s, lean, with anxious eyes. He gave me a brisk wave. We parked side by side, stepped out, and I wasted no time sharing details. His face turned pale when I described the deer carcass and my glimpses of that lurking silhouette. He asked if I thought it might be a poacher or a man in a ghillie suit. I shook my head. It didn't move like a man. It looked bigger and was quiet, really quiet. And the way the kills looked, like it knew exactly where to tear. I can't explain it. Alexander looked unnerved, but he was determined to do his job. Together we made a plan to comb through the area near the river, hoping to gather clearer evidence or find tracks that might explain this. While we walked, I told him about the couple who'd heard strange sounds the night before. He asked if we had a record of any similar sightings. I said no, not in my recollection. We do get the occasional rumor of odd shapes in the big thicket. Some folks talk about ghosts in these old cypress stands or strange howls at night, but no official record of a lethal, unknown presence. We followed a game trail that cut through dense clusters of palmettos and short pines. Alexander led the way, rifle slung over his shoulder. I kept scanning the trees, certain we were not alone. The forest seemed brighter now, but that only heightened my anxiety, as if the unknown presence was bold enough to watch us in daylight without fear. We reached the same muddy bank where I found the torn raccoon. The carcass was already swarming with more flies. Nearby, we discovered a crude path of bent stalks, possibly left by something large passing through. Alexander and I examined the area. He murmured that the tracks were unusual. He pointed to a patch of soft earth that showed partial impressions. Elongated toes, spaced too widely to be a bear, more symmetrical than a human foot, and deeper than you'd expect from an ordinary person. He measured them with a small tape from his pocket, over 13 inches in length. That unsettled us both. We continued in tense silence, occasionally calling out to see if anyone was around. All we got was the rustle of leaves. When we arrived at the deer carcass, the stench hit us again, though it had grown worse with the midday heat. Alexander turned away, coughing. "This is insane," he said. "No normal animal does this." We snapped more photos, not sure how else to document something so bizarre. He took a few samples of the surrounding soil in a plastic evidence bag, just in case. The forest around us was still, as if waiting. Then we heard a splash from the far side of the river. We both raised our heads, hearts pounding. We saw ripples spreading across the surface, but nothing broke the water. It could have been a turtle sliding off a log, or it could have been that unknown shape. Alexander gestured, mouthing silently that we should head to where the splash came from. I nodded, though my instincts shouted caution. We forded the river at the shallows, rifles up, scanning the opposite bank. Thick brush greeted us. We moved slowly, the ground squelching underfoot. Each step was loud in that quiet place. We paused to listen, only hearing the drip of water from our pants. As we trudged forward, a hawk screeched overhead, then soared away. The moment felt surreal, like we were intruders in a realm meant to remain hidden from humans. Each tree seemed to loom tall, each vine twisting down like a hungry serpent. The deeper we went, the less sunlight penetrated. The canopy thickened. Our hearts hammered in unison. I could sense Alexander's breath growing ragged. Mine was no steadier. Suddenly, we found ourselves in a small clearing drenched in dappled light. A fallen tree trunk lay rotting in the middle, mushrooms sprouting from its bark. It was quiet, unnervingly so, yet we both sensed a presence. A flicker of movement at the edge made us spin. Leaves rustled, but we saw nothing. Then, in the blink of an eye, a figure passed between two thick tree trunks. My heart jumped into my throat. Tall, lanky, arms that seemed a bit too long. There was a subtle pattern across its hide, mottled stripes or spots that helped it blend with the dappled shade. Alexander let out a hushed exclamation. Neither of us fired our weapons. The shape had vanished before we could even raise our sights. We heard a low hiss, not quite an animal growl, more like a sharp exhalation of air. It made the hair on my arms stand up. We exchanged a quick glance. Alexander mouthed, "We should fall back." I nodded. We started to back away, rifles still raised, pulses pounding like drums in our ears. The silence pressed down again. Then we saw it more clearly, peering from behind a cypress. Its face was partially hidden, but I caught a glimpse of dark, reflective eyes, set wide on a head that sloped back into a ridged crest. Its mouth, if that's what I saw, was narrow with a hint of glistening teeth. My stomach twisted in horror, not at the sight alone, but at the cold, calculated way it observed us, as though weighing its next move. For a heartbeat, none of us moved. Then it slipped behind the trunk, swift and quiet. We heard the rustle of leaves, and by the time we lunged closer, the shape was gone. We stood in the clearing, hearts racing, certain that if it wanted to take us, it could have. Sweat poured down my brow. Alexander's eyes were wild. "We need more backup," he said, his voice trembling. "We can't track that thing alone." I nodded, forcing back the surge of adrenaline that made me want to chase it. Rationality won out. We retreated the way we came, stumbling back across the river, slipping on algae-covered rocks in our haste. Upon returning to our vehicles, we tried the radio. Alexander managed to get a better signal, and he reported that we'd found large prints, 2 carcasses with strange wounds, and had a visual on an unknown upright figure. The dispatcher sounded startled. She told us to return to the station, file a full report, and wait for instructions. Rangers from another district might be called in, maybe even wildlife experts. We agreed. Despite every fiber of my being wanting to gather more evidence, I knew we were outmatched and unprepared for a direct confrontation. The drive back to the station was tense. Alexander kept glancing in the side mirrors, half expecting to see that dark silhouette loping behind us. I felt the same chill. Each bend in the narrow roads felt like an ambush waiting to happen. But we reached the main entrance without incident, crossing from the remote wilderness into the slightly more populated area. The relief was temporary. Once inside the station, we explained everything to our chief ranger, Sam Reynolds, a no-nonsense fellow with 30 years of field experience. He listened, arms folded across his chest, face grim. He believed us. Seeing the photos, the track measurements, and the raw fear in our eyes was enough. "It might be some unknown escaped exotic," he said, attempting a rational angle. "People smuggle strange animals sometimes, or keep dangerous species illegally. Or maybe a severely deformed black bear," he added. But none of us truly bought that explanation. The footprints alone didn't match a bear. The methodical butchery of the carcasses felt too deliberate. We spent the rest of the afternoon planning a coordinated search. Sam called in 2 more rangers, Harriet and Lucas, both experienced and calm under pressure. We formed 2 teams of 2, Alexander and Lucas as one, Harriet and me as the other. The plan was to head back early the next day with better equipment, night vision cameras, tranquilizer rifles, flares. The possibility of capturing this unknown presence seemed slim, but at least we could try to confirm its existence and figure out what to do next. That night, I stayed in my modest cabin near the station. Sleep was impossible. I kept replaying the day's events, especially the moment when I locked eyes with that lurking shape. I'd never felt so helpless, like prey caught in a predator's crosshairs. Around midnight, I stepped outside to get some air. The Texas sky spread wide above me, stars flickering. The pines swayed in a gentle breeze. Normally, I'd find solace in these nights, thinking of my father's stories about ancestors who roamed the land, guided by the spirits of nature. But that night, the wind carried an undercurrent of warning, as though the entire forest whispered caution. Before dawn, Harriet and I loaded our truck with supplies. She was a steady presence, older than me by a few years, with lines around her eyes that spoke of many days in the field. She'd grown up in a ranching family, knew animals well, carried herself with calm confidence. We didn't chat much on the drive. The pre-dawn hush was enough to keep us silent. The plan was for both teams to sweep through the area systematically. Harriet and I would start near the deer carcass site. Alexander and Lucas would begin at a separate location a few miles east, where another trail led deeper into the preserve. We had a designated check-in schedule over the radio every 2 hours. As the sun began to break, painting the sky with pale orange and pink, we arrived at the site. The stench of the rotting deer greeted us. We parked under tall pines and prepared our gear. Harriet muttered, "This is some business," wrinkling her nose at the smell. She checked her tranquilizer rifle, loaded with potent sedative darts meant for large mammals. I carried a standard-issue sidearm loaded with real bullets, but my plan was to avoid confrontation if possible. We were there to observe and document more than anything else. We found the deer in a worse state than before. Scavengers had gotten to it. Chunks of flesh were missing, and the bones looked gnawed. We photographed it again, though the original kill marks were mostly obliterated by opportunistic feeders. Harriet pointed at the muddy bank. "We got fresh prints here," she said. My heart skipped as I knelt down to see. Sure enough, the elongated impressions marked the ground. They overlapped some smaller raccoon tracks, indicating they were newer. My throat went dry. Harriet took pictures while I scanned them, tree line. The memory of that tall silhouette vivid in my mind. She laid a small measuring tape by the prints. Over 13 inches again. But this time the prints were a bit deeper, maybe from a heavier stance or from carrying something. The morning was still quiet, though not as unnaturally silent as the day before. I heard a few distant birds, a woodpecker hammering. Even so, the place felt uneasy. Harriet and I moved carefully, searching for any sign of movement. My shirt was already clinging to my back with sweat.